Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our next discussion on this short story, A Rose for Emily. We will discuss different themes and other variables presented through this story by William Faulkner. The message of the story is wrapped up through these themes. His vision has been conveyed through these themes. He has intertwined many themes in this very short story, very smartly, very skillfully, very perfectly. As a writer, he seems to be uh, apt in promoting his vision, promoting his ideas through his stories. Especially, he has painted the southern community, the southern culture, in a very apt way. Let's begin our today's discussion, keeping in view the main themes of this story. We will not go into uh, the smaller themes, the details of the minor themes, although there are so many themes intertwined and intermingled into the very texture of the story. Yet we will keep our focus on some of the main themes here. Dear students, this short story, A Rose for Emily, is written by Nobel Prize winner, writer, novelist, poet William Faulkner. He belonged to the American South, and most of his creative literary pieces, like A Rose for Emily, reflect this region. He was brought up in Mississippi and later joined the Canadian and the British Royal Air Force during the First World War as a trainee, as a soldier. He is best known for his novels like The Sound and the Fury and As I Lay Dying, The Sanctuary, etc. He also had a short period of time in Hollywood, writing screen scripts, dialogues for films. The story revolves around this story, the present story revolves around a necrophiliac woman named Miss Emily while illuminating the decaying old southern region. You know, these southern states are still the most backward part of America, the so called land of opportunity. And in that era, after the World War First, uh, when the whole world was facing financial depressions and other difficulties to survive, this region was also badly hit, and human catastrophe was at its worst. So there was crime, killing, murder, horror everywhere. This portion of America, the southern portion, is mostly abundant with the black race, the people from black community, as they call them, uh, labeling them in a very rude tone. Dear students, among all the themes intertwined and intermixed into the very texture of the story, horror, bleakish horror, meshy type of horror, suspense, mystery is the one that gets the readers so much engaged and absorbed into this story. Horror is the key, that element of the story that elevates the graveness of the story to the next level and makes it look amazing and amusing and gripping to read. It is not horrific at all in Edgar Allan Poe fashion or Agatha Christie fashion. It stands out for its own deviant way of horror storytelling. अगरचे फॉकनर ने बेटे ये हॉरर इसके मेन थीम के तौर पर इसको रखा है, लेकिन ये हॉरर जो है वो इतना लाउड नहीं है, इतना वायोलेंट हॉरर नहीं है. स्टिल इट इज़ हॉरिफाइंग, it is creepy, it is messy, surely it is dark and gloomy, it is somewhat annoying also at the end, repelling you may say, where you find a corpse being cared for more than 40 years by a lady, young lady rather. At the age of 30, she protected that dead man's body in that, locked in that room, in that wedding chamber, and remained with that man for more than 40 years. And this is very creepy that she sleeps with that dead body and thinks that she is married to that dead man. This makes the story a very horrible reading to do. Horror is there. We are shaken, we are shattered from within. And this is what makes the story a Gothic one. Dear students, as students of literature, you know very well that stories, novels, and prose writings do have themes of many kinds. But a writer never elaborates what he is going to depict, what type of theme he is going to present, what type of vision he is going to present. It is in the texture of the story that we have to find out the theme, the vision, the viewpoint the writer presents. In the same way, this story's narration, this story's description, presentation, style of writing, the choice of words, the atmosphere created here, all create horror and deliver an impact, a very deep impact on the reader's mind. That is what horror is, that grips our attention. The story would never be able to deliver and render the proper impact in reader's mind without horror in it. And this is why it is one of the most prominent themes of this story. The most striking evidence of horror that we find in the story is when we come to realize that Miss Emily Grierson slept with the decayed corpse of Homer Baron for more than 40 years, as we have already discussed this point. This particular event, horrific type of event of this story, transcends any other vital moment of the story. It is pretty shockingly terrifying for a mentally stable person to think that a woman had been lying beside a dead body, embracing it, and she continued to do so year after years, night after nights, more than 40 years of her life, the major portion of her life. Dear students, as we have seen, that the descriptions themselves are there to play their part in enhancing the horror impact on the reader's mind. Just look at some of the details the narrator gives of the corpse and the atmosphere of that death chamber, you may say, that is supposedly was wedding chamber in eyes of Emily, the dead Emily now. The description therein, dust is everywhere. It is said that we find dust in each and every writing of William Faulkner. Dust is a very prominent figure, rather, a persona in his stories. You will find it lurking here and there. This is the symbolic representation of the mystery. Dust is a symbol of mystery, unknown, the decay, destruction, ruin, The way the narrator in A Rose for Emily describes the severe condition of the corpse, the dead body of Homer Baron, is horrifyingly beautiful, absorbing, as he says, what was left of him, rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay, and upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of the patient and abiding dust. That is again the dust and the cobwebs, nets of the cobwebs there that spread uh, a sense of horror, create a sense of horror in the mind of the readers. This type of description that is uh, very acutely horrifying, you may say, has got a very deep imprints on the minds of the readers and give the story an impression of a mystery, a horror story, a gothic story indeed. Dear students, then there is another amazing type of evidence there that we find when the door is broke open by the people of the town. Uh, the pillow, the side pillow, the second pillow, on which there is the sign of somebody sleeping all the time with that corpse, hugging the dead body. Miss Emily had been lying beside him, the dead corpse, the whole time, as he says, the narrator says. Then we noticed that in the second pillow was the indentation of a head, a sign of a head, a dent of a head lying on that pillow. One of us lifted something from it and leaning forward. One of us means the doctor, the same doctor who had visited to verify the death of her father. The same doctor uh, went ahead, leaning over the dead body. That faint and invisible dust, dry and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron grey hair. This is the hair, a stray hair of Emily herself. In the very early description of the story, her hair were described as iron grey hair. So, a strand of iron grey hair is found there, and we are again shocked and horrified by this cruel fact exposed at the end of the story. It is not the end of the story, it is the beginning. And this is also very beautiful that the beginning is the end of the story, and the end is the beginning of the story. And we just wander through the recollections of the narrator all through this story. Such a grotesque act can never be explained more perfectly than this. Here, not only this ghastly psychotic act strikes the reader with terror, but also the scary atmosphere inside her house plays no less important role in creating an inexplicable sense of horror in the reader's minds. The atmosphere, the terrifying details, the presence of a dead body, and the facts revealed at the end of the story all combine to create the overall impact of a horror story. A critic, while evaluating the character of Miss Emily, Edward Stone says, in this regard, Edward Stone, in his article entitled as Usher, Pequelin, and Miss Emily, The Progress of Southern Gothic Stories, says, she lives on into old age in the house, filled with dust and shadows, a place associated in her townsmen's eyes with an unspoken and mysterious horror. Her house became dusty in disuse and smelled horrible. It was so dusty that dust would slowly form a swirl rather. When they opened the locked, sealed door, the dust came out as a burst. The narrator in this story, A Rose for Emily, describes the presence of dust in a beautiful way. Described it much more beautifully as he says, the leather was cracked. Leather when they sat on the chairs and when on the sofas and chairs. And when they sat down, a faint dust rose sluggishly about their thighs, spinning with slow motes in the single sun ray. On a tarnished gilt easel before the fireplace stood a crayon portrait of Miss Emily's father. This statement sums up the antiquity and darkness, mystery inside Miss Emily's house and creates the horrific atmosphere that the reader finds himself engrossed in. Another instance of this story's horror element is seen when Miss Emily Grierson goes to the druggist and tells the druggist that she wants to buy arsenic poison. As expected, the druggist asks her why she needs it, and in response, she just stares at the druggist and tilts her head back and gives him a frightening look, just like a horrifying ghost. No answer from the mouth, but the expressions are very horrible to look at. Uh, Dear students, I might have provided you a movie on this very short story that is present on the web. It was filmed time and again by different filmmakers, but unfortunately, there are some gore scenes which cannot be brought before students. So I hindered myself from presenting the visuals to you people. Otherwise, it might have been much more clearer what are the expressions of the lady. Dear students, through her horrifying looks, ghostly, terrible looks, she successfully appalls the druggist as he wraps up the arsenic for her and delivers it to her through the Negro delivery boy. Is not able to uh, come to her the second time. He is not able to face her eyes, rather, which are horrifyingly uh, terrifying. This really raises a question in reader's mind about what exactly a woman will do with arsenic poison when she doesn't even tell the druggist about what she will do with it. This question incites the fear, mystery in the reader's mind, surely. Suspense, some type of mystery is there. We we expect something bad to happen, and this is what makes the story a horror story. We keep on expecting something bad to happen. Dear students, then another major theme of this story is isolation. Isolation depicted at its best. As the story proceeds, Miss Emily Grierson is seen isolating, secluding herself, more and more cutting herself away from society. Addressing this issue of isolation, author Floyd C. Watkins in his article, The Structure of a Rose for Emily, a very good and nice article, says, in youth, Emily is not wholly separated from her somewhat sympathetic environment. In later life, however, she withdraws more and more until her own death again exposes her towards the townspeople. It is seen in the story that Except the black servant and Homer Baron, Miss Emily Grierson spends the rest of her life all alone after her father's death. She keeps herself to herself, never allowing any intruders into her life, into her isolation, into her self contained life. The restraints her father had brought about in her life. She is now habitual of this type of loneliness, cutting herself away from society. And what the havoc this isolation, this seclusion has played upon her is very evident from the bitter facts we know through the story's narration that she has, just like her family trait, become a mad woman, a psycho case, as we are told and hinted upon that her family had got the traits of being mad people. One of her aunts went mad once. Her father's attitude is also psychic type of sadistic type of attitude. He is the main culprit who just brings her to that very prison of isolation and is the most guilty party, seems to be the most guilty party in this very story. We know from the narration, the events of the story, that Emily doesn't like to mix up with the other people of her community. She keeps herself aloof and away and diffident from the common people, from the community she lives in. She has rather walled herself within the four walls of her house. Even one of the events when there might be a social gathering of some funeral kind, when her father dies, she clung to her father's dead body with a view to keeping herself away from the gathering of the people. Yet she didn't want people's gathering or their condolences. She doesn't want to receive the condolences at all, as she would meet people at the door and say her father was not dead and send them away. She starts living the life of a loner, a secluded person after her father's death, and all that was left for her was just a servant who used to do her household duties, going to the bazaar and bringing some eatables and like that. No presence of any other stranger, outsider, community member at all. Then we see another sudden turn and change. That is again the theme of change that intrudes into her privacy, her self created privacy, rather, that Baron, Homer Baron, comes into her life. She again goes into the outside world of her life. She goes into the streets, into the bazaars, and even to the club with that supposedly the future husband of Emily. For a short period of time, soon after her father's death, she was accompanied by a foreman, a worker named Homer Baron, a Yankee type of man who came there from the north. People used to see them driving in a yellow wheeled buggy on Sunday afternoons, but he lasted for too little a time. This happiness or this communion with society was very short, brief, and just gone. ये जो कम्युनियन था माशरे के साथ बेटे, ये फिर वो जो राबता था, बॉन्ड, वो एक सिंबल के तौर पर आया उसकी ज़िंदगी में, a symbol to reconnect her to the world at large, the open world, the community, the society. But that link that relationship again broke down. And that man, in shape of that Homer Baron, the worker, deputed there to work by the municipal committee to construct the sidewalks, sideways, and the streets of the town was now gone. The symbol of reconnection, the wire that was provided by society to reconnect her to the living world outside, was again distorted, was again shattered. He was gone after the road construction was complete, and when he came back, no one ever saw Homer Baron again, because Miss Emily killed him as her dreams were shattered, because Homer Baron was not a marriage material. He might have refused her after entering the house for the last time and was killed there by that psycho lady. Miss Emily is isolated again, isolated for good, forever. Her habit of isolating herself is what she actually inherited from her family, from her, not from even from her father, but from her family. This is a family trait that runs just like blood through the veins of this family. They are snobbish people. They think that they are superior beings and they should not mix up with the common lot. And this is the idea of her father, dead father, that she should not marry the common people. They are not eligible matches for her, as she belongs to the upper strata of society, and therefore she should not marry the young people who are after her when she is young and marriageable. If we look at the story, we find society, her family, and herself responsible for her miseries, for such horrible incidents, for such a great cosm, such a deep wound of isolation that she has to suffer forever. First of all, the blame can be put against the family, our father, and then we may blame the conduct and the atmosphere around her, the community as well, the society at large. It is also the society that has forced her to be confined to her house. Her father is largely responsible on the outset for such a miserably isolated life of Emily. People in Jefferson believed that the Griersons held themselves a little too high, thought very snobbishly, vainly, for what they really were, and that is why Emily's father never considered any man, any young man, worthy enough to marry his daughter. He was too proud of his blue blood, rather, and drove all of Emily's suitors away with his whip. The young boy saw that whip in his hand. A very strict type of fellow, snobbish, psycho case, you may say, who is a social type of fellow who hates society and keeps himself to himself. And that is the dilemma of this family that destroys and ruins Emily's life. He is the first guilty party. Consequently, when she got 30, she was still a bachelor. Readers might have thought that Homer Baron will turn out to be the light, the ray of hope that would shed upon the dark and isolated life of Miss Emily. But unfortunately, he is never seen again. The light fades away. The dim light fades away. The darkness prevails, the gloom remains, lurks there again on her life. And by the end of the story, readers realize that she was doomed to be alone, destined to be alone. It was her destiny. People in Jefferson would only get the sight of the Negro man going in and out of the house. The slave he might be a slave with a market basket, but the front door was never opened apart from these movements of the Negro slave or the servant. It is even more pathetic and horrifying to know that no one was able to enter her house from the time when she was 40, except for a period of 6 or 7 years, during which she gave China painting lessons to the uh, community, some limited people indeed. When the new generation took over the town, she didn't have any student to visit her house for taking China painting lessons. And this is also very significant that she does not go out of her house to deliver these lessons. She calls some willing students to come to her house and be there for a certain period of time and then shuts the doors again. Dear students, so isolation created by society, created by community, isolation, seclusion that is self imposed, or whatever the shape it is, Faulkner thinks that it is ruinous, it is destroying, it is messy, it is dark and gloomy, and it is a major theme of this story. Then, next, we come on to the theme of tradition and change, which we have also discussed in our previous question as well. Some of the hints of this theme will be discussed here. William Faulkner himself was a man of the American South, as we know very well. So it is no surprise that his writings would reflect his region, his area, his people, the life of the people, the community in which he was a part himself. Like many of his other writings, this short story also illuminates the decaying Old South. The conflict between tradition and change is a noteworthy theme of this story, therefore. The issue of conflict between tradition and change has been addressed in different ways throughout the story. For instance, Miss Emily's house stood erect when the whole town went through a major overhaul and repair and newness. People were changing the shapes of their houses to look more modern, more new. But Emily's house stood the havocs of the new change. She refused even to make repairs to the decaying old house, keeping its individuality among other modern buildings of the area. The description of the town and the whereabouts therein suggests that northern industrialization has braced the old southern town Jefferson also. But what remains unaffected by this havoc of new industrialization change is Miss Emily Grierson's house. Though it has gradually been decaying with time, but it haughtily represents the tradition of the Old South. When every other sign of the Old South has been obliterated by the dominating North. That is, the North is a symbol of change, where newness, the modernism has asserted itself, and this South, as being undeveloped area of the country, is now the target of this new change, being modernized. However, northern industrialization might have encroached the south, but people in Jefferson were noticed holding on to their traditional notions, as some of the ladies thought that Homer Baron and Emily's relationship was setting a bad example for the youth. Still, they have got the old notions running through the very fabric of this small community. People are holding on to the old beliefs, yet, although they are succumbing to the new changes as a community, new buildings, new roads, new lights, new mail systems, but they are still believe in the past traditions, and thus a conflict is there between the old and the new, between the modern and the orthodox. It is significant that subsequently the ladies complained to the Baptist minister about this relationship of Homer and Emily. Later on, minister's wife wrote to Emily's relatives in Alabama to do something about this newly emerged phenomena of uh, relationship, which was never looked upon as a good thing by community. Although in the early phase of this relationship, people were happy that she came out of her house. But when this routine went on for many Sundays, holidays, they were annoyed that the tradition, the values of society were being challenged by this young couple. Addressing this issue in his article titled The Causes of Emily's Characters and Destiny in A Rose for Emily, Wang Xiaoyan says, a critic, gradual changes had taken place in the south, and the invasion of the northern industrialization had also found its way in the southern society and intruded into the minds of the southerners. But the southerners were still associated with the outdated traditional modes of thought. They were desperately submitted to the old way of life, not yet ready to uh, come uh, at terms with the new changes. Nevertheless, people in Jefferson, this small town, were following with the tide of northern industrialization. But Miss Emily Grierson stood firm as the embodiment of older traditions, defying the modernization as she refused to affix metal number plate of the mailbox and a mailbox to her front door when the whole town enjoyed the facility of free postal delivery. Thus, horror, isolation, and the conflict between tradition and change are some of the major and notable themes in this short story of ours, A Rose for Emily. Dear students, there are many other minor themes elaborated and interspersed in this short story. Uh, we will look upon them in a separate discussion, inshallah, in a very short and brief separate discussion. Thank you very much, dear students, for being with me for this discussion. Till the next discussion, it is Allah Hafiz and goodbye. Thank you very much again.